You're listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Matthiesen, Wickert Lehrer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Subrogation Support Network. This is your host, Ashton Kirsch, with Subrogation Support Network, sponsored by Matthiesen, Wickert Lehrer. It is my honor and pleasure to have my good friend and partner with Matthiesen, Wickert Lehrer, Mark Solomon, join me today to have a fascinating discussion about steer, cow, livestock, and the road claims, and the book published by Mark Solomon, Gary Wickert, and our firm, Where's the Beef? So, Mark, thank you so much for joining today. How are you doing?
Excellent. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Beautiful. Yeah. So, Mark, this is more of it's just really a conversation and an opportunity for us to talk about the book, talk about just livestock claims in general, your practice with MWL, and really just anything else that you think would be interesting, more of a dialogue rather than, just me speaking at people, which frankly, that's the majority of what I do with these webinars and different conversations. So it's a different way of going about things. I think this has been fascinating. The podcast has been extremely well received. So, it's really nice to have you on to join us today. I've wanted to find a topic for you to discuss with me for some time.
Well, I've vehemently been described as the bovine barrister as of late by other law partners. That's I'm not going to say when I was in law school that was something I anticipated going to, but it's neat kind of learning about all the stock laws across the country, and especially where I am in Texas, that all 256 counties have the ability outside of 22, and I'll discuss that in a little bit, to adopt their own stock laws. And if anybody's been on our website, there was the painstaking task, took me almost 2 years to gather up the stock law as best I could for all 256 counties within Texas. It's obviously available on our website. I get calls quite frequently from attorneys and claim reps across the country asking about certain counties. I get calls from ranchers who are having problems with neighbors, and I get calls from attorneys who say, hey, I've looked at your chart, didn't find a stock law for this county, but was able to locate one, and they share that information. So the chart continues to be updated every so often. I've had so many charts or certain counties where the courthouse had a fire and all the stock laws were lost. So there are a couple counties where it's simply missing because some of these elections, and we'll talk about those, were in the 1800s. And so it's kind of a very unique and interesting part of not only Texas jurisprudence because of the uniqueness with each state, but across the country and how it all developed as people expanded westward and took over the open range and started domesticating these cows for, food, milk, products, trade, everything that cattle can be used for.
And you said, did you say 256 counties in Texas?
Yes. Yeah.
That is crazy. So I think I told you this, Mark, but I'm a crazy person, and I decided to fly my 5-month-old, my 3-year-old, my 14-year-old, my wife and I. We all went out to Europe and went to Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and Paris just a few weeks ago. And when I was there, I saw this really funny map that actually compared Western Europe to Texas, and it just showed just the sheer and the vast size of Texas, which is basically was showing, hey, if you drove from Brussels to Moscow, you're basically still in Texas. I don't remember if those were the exact cities, but it was just, really fascinating. So, you were in a huge state and just a fascinating state. So, yeah, so we'll get into that. And the sheer differences and the deviations between how claims and stock laws are and how claims are going to be interpreted in each specific county. It's fascinating. But before we jump into that, I really want to just ask you just kind of a broad question. Now, Mark, tell me a bit about yourself and your practice down in our Texas office. What are you doing most of the time on a day-to-day?
So a little bit of everything. I am the managing partner of the Austin branch, and we are a relatively new branch, about 4 years that we've been open, and we've expanded from just one lawyer up to now 3 lawyers in the office and a full staff, as well as helping manage an attorney out of Nashville and her paralegals in Corpus Christi. So we have a pretty big footprint in Texas. We're trying to expand that and expand the practice within Texas. But I am originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and went to high school there and grew up there, and then moved down to Austin for school at the University of Texas, and then down to Houston for law school at South Texas College of Law. Started doing subrogation practice as a law clerk with a firm there, and took to that and stayed in Houston for 12 years. Moved up to Austin 8 years ago to help manage the in-house counsel for Farmers Insurance, and was with Farmers for 4 years. And then, like I said, I've been with MWL now for 4 years. It'll be 4 years at the end of next month. So that's a quick little biography of Mark Solomon as it relates to his legal career. But we started looking at charts and how the stock law all came about. Is we had the cattle law book that my partner Gary Wickert had written.
So no,
what had never been
Mark,
done.
You're now one of the authors of this book, and this is the Where's the Beef book, which is actually one of my favorite things. When I joined this firm some time ago, we have all these legal treatises. We have the work comp book, work comp subrogation, auto subrogation, health and disability subrogation, coverage subrogation, and then Where's the Beef? Now that is the book. It was just fascinating. It's actually a pretty thick book with hundreds of pages about just that. Where's the Beef? How to subrogate and bring claims on livestock cases. Tell me a little bit about this book and your involvement, and what's covered in there.
So what's covered it's a 50-state overview of cattle laws in all 50 states and how they relate. And it's very interesting to figure out that as people expanded westward, how cattle and livestock were dealt with in terms of, keeping, and the word is fence in or fence out. So the default in most states is that you actually have a duty to fence out your neighbor's cattle. And, the cattle were free to roam. Everything was open range, and you had to fence out. Now, with the advent of the automobile coming into play, it really changed the western frontier. And most states moved from the fence out, where you got to keep your neighbor's cattle out, to the fence in, where you actually have to keep your cattle now fenced in. So the Where's the Beef book looks at all 50 states. It's got the 256 counties in Texas as best we can, updated with all of the open and closed range cases or counties, in Texas. So open range, you'll hear this, means that the cattle are free to roam at large, and you have to fence out your neighbor's cattle. You'll also see closed range. Closed range means you have to fence in your cattle. And of course, nothing would be as confusing as now we get the federal government involved, but all land abutting U.S. and state highways become closed range, which means you have to keep your cattle out of that. So you have these interesting nuances, especially in Texas, where you could have an open range county where your cattle are free to roam. However, if your land abuts a U.S. or state highway, you have to fence those cattle off of that roadway. And then to make things even more fun, there are 22 counties that the Texas state legislature passed a law saying that they are open range counties no matter what. They are not allowed to adopt a stock law, which is what the term is here in Texas, and make their counties closed range. They are full open range counties, and they will be for the very foreseeable future. And so what you'll hear about
what about a case? What about a case where the property's on both counties' lines, where it kind of goes right over the line and it's on both? I mean, have you handled any cases or seen anything related to something that impacts two very different or deviating county rules?
I have not, in terms of someone's ranch that abuts or goes across a county line. And we've said 256. It's 254. Sorry, my count was off by 2. But, I think in that situation, you deal with individually what part of the ranch it occurred on and which county the ranch laid on. I mean, if people ever here have heard the King Ranch, which is down near the Corpus Christi area, I think geographically the King Ranch eats up more space than the state of Rhode Island. And that's just one person's ranch. So my guess is that's going to cross a few county lines. And so the way it works is, whatever the fence, wherever it lies in that county, that's the one that's going to control in terms of the stock laws.
Interesting. So the proofs necessary and the evidence needed to produce and make a claim in both of those. I mean, let's say the commercial auto that hits a steer in the roadway. I mean, the question is, what do you need to prove? I mean, and I'd imagine that proving up the elements of that case are going to deviate significantly depending on what the stock law is. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on whether it's an open range or closed range county. You have to prove up that there was some sort of negligent action on behalf of the cattle owner. So the biggest hurdle we get on these is, hurdle number one is, how do we identify the cattle owner, right? How do we prove who owns these cows? It's getting easier. Most are tagged in the ear, and you can figure that out. But, these very large ranches that intersect, there's cows that wander. And then the next biggest issue is proving some sort of negligent act, and that goes back to notice. And so, for example, we see a lot of trees that fall on fences, right? The tree falls, it hits the fence, it takes it out, and the cattle escape. Well, if, these cattle ranches are on 100,000 acre ranches, they're not checking the fence every day. And once they get noticed, then they have to act as a reasonably prudent cattle owner would do. So, lightning strikes a tree, the branch falls, knocks the fence down, cow gets out, and 2 hours later we have a vehicle collision. Probably no liability, likely no liability on that cattle rancher. Now, same situation, but the accident happens 4 days down the road. Well, now the cattle rancher's got issues, right? There's a reasonable period for them to be on notice and to inspect their fences and make sure that their cattle aren't roaming around. One very interesting topic or resource we use is a lot of the sheriffs in each of these counties keep what's called as stray records, ESTRAY, stray records. And when we're investigating these claims, we will routinely call these sheriff's offices and get on county websites to look at these as stray notices, because there are issues where you've got repeat offender cows, and these cows have learned that they're 2,000 pounds and that a normally constructed and well-constructed barbed wire fence is not going to stop a 2,000 cow that wants to walk through that fence. And so they will walk through and they will get out. So we actually have problem cows that we deal with, and we've had cases where the cattle owner, this is the fourth or fifth offense for this cow. And so we make the argument that, it's now a known problem. They've got to do more to keep this cow contained within the property. So, every investigation is unique in terms of trying to piece together what happened and whether we've got any negligence on these cattle owners.
Now, I'd love to go into some more about, you've given me some stories about just kind of the incredible and the wildly incredible efforts that you've taken assembling the research for these 254 Texas counties. What all went into that? How did you get this? Was there just a resource out there? Did you have to actually, go door to door and get this information?
So I made a lot of phone calls and made a lot of friends to a lot of county clerks and county judges, and trying to get that dug up from libraries. And again, some of these were from the 1800s and they're handwritten in 1800 style cursive, and they were tough to read. And, to make things even more fun, the stock law and the agriculture code in Texas has two different categories of animals that apply to it. So, one is usually horses, mules, jacks, jennets, donkeys, hogs, sheeps, and cattle. And then you've got sheep and goats that fall under something separate, and trying to get all those figured out. Whether the adoption of the stock law, and it's kind of a weird deal, but when the county says they've adopted the stock law, that means they're closed range. So they are now a fence in. And if they've not adopted the stock law, it's a fence out county. And then, in gathering all this, we learned, counties used to be divided by precincts. They still are in terms of elections, but there were certain counties where each precinct had their own election. And so you literally may walk across the street, be in a different precinct, and the stock law is different from what it is across the street and within the same county. And so, trying to get all that gathered was interesting. I spent, again, almost 2 years calling clerks and compiling the list, calling county judges to track down this information. And it's actually been very helpful. Every one that I keep now in a folder, and I get calls from county judges all the time that say, hey, we found out our own stock law. You have it. We don't. And I will send that to that county judge and try to get everything put together for them. So
you're saying that you're going to them, finding out that they don't even know the law in their county, and you're giving them the law in their county?
Yeah. I mean, for example, I'm looking at my chart I've got pulled up here. Delta County in Texas passed their stock law adoption for hogs, sheep, and goats in the year 1889. And then they did the horses, mules, jacks, jennets, and cattle 2 years later in 1891. So you're talking 130 plus year old laws that are still on the books related to these livestock.
That's fascinating. I mean, it's also fascinating now you're thinking about applying it to the context of, substantial motor vehicle transport and just how profoundly different it is today versus, in the 1890s or even before. So that is definitely interesting. Now, you said this is all on the website? Just for the audience, can you give some more information that if they want to find this information, where they could find that?
Yeah. On our website, on our charts, there is a full-on cattle. So you can type in stock law. We've got the charts for all 50 states, for all 254 counties in Texas. We don't have the individual county records on the website just because it's ever changing. I get updates pretty frequently, but if anybody needs a copy, please feel free to email me for whichever specific county there is, and I'll get that to you. And the chart that's on the website has a little asterisk next to the date. And if that asterisk is there, it means I've got a copy of the record from the county. I'm not missing many, but, I am missing some. And again, someone went back to, I had a county clerk say, well, the courthouse burned down, in the 1920s, and we don't know. We never found them. I had one where the stock law election was as recent as 2005 because they went back and canvassed the election. Someone dug through it and determined that when they originally had done the election, it was 40, 50 years before, they didn't send out the proper notice as required by the statute. So they had to rehold the election as of 2005, which is very recent, considering that most of these were in the 1900s, 1920s, 1890s, where a lot of these stock laws were adopted.
Interesting. Okay, now Are most of the claims you see, Mark, involving obviously the research you've done in the stock laws, are they primarily automobile on livestock? Is that we're representing the be it the insurance carrier who insures that automobile? Is that the majority? Are you seeing this in any other context that's worth noting?
Not particularly. That's the majority of the claims. Is we've got a commercial trucker. We see that a lot where they'll strike a livestock, a cow or something in the roadway. And, then we try to figure that out. And I don't know what it is. And obviously it makes sense, but an overwhelming majority of the claims I see are black cows at night, right? Obviously that's going to be very hard to see a black cow in the middle of the roadway on a small country 2-lane highway out in far middle of Texas, right? There's just not going to be a whole lot there. So we get a lot of 18-wheeler commercial accidents with the cattle. And you're an adjuster and you're listening to this out in the internet world. If you come across one of these, the key is get some photos, get some investigation done of the fence, talk to the neighbors, get everything you can quickly. It's generally a pretty bad scene out there when a semi truck strikes a cow. It's pretty dramatic. We have rollovers, we have injuries, we have all that. And, there's a lot going on, but in terms of the investigation to recover on these is, canvass the neighbors, get pictures of the fence, try to figure out where it is. The cattle are generally easier. One of the wilder stories I had was up in Kansas where it was a herd of buffalo that were being raised, and the buffalo got spooked by something and they herded up and took off. And they ran right through the fence, and we had a couple claims stemming from that. And it took the sheriffs of everywhere over a week to gather up these buffalo. These buffalo had made it at one point 70 miles from where the ranch was. They herded up and they took off. So, getting these claims in, it's very interesting, and the investigation is always fun to try to piece together what exactly happened.
Absolutely. And I have an example that I actually use in a lot of other negotiations seminars and different things I give that involves the livestock claim. And I'll briefly touch on it and then ask you if you have any other interesting examples. But I handled a case just last year where pretty much another insurance company, new potential prospective client asked me to take a look. Other firm they were currently using, and frankly, I was marketing for trying to get their business. They sent over the case saying, hey, this is a $500,000 or so loss, cargo, work comp, damage. Pretty much what happened is, just like you said, semi-truck hits a black cow at night, smashes into him, rollover, jackknife caused a significant injury, significant loss. We get the case. This was a few weeks after the accident, but basically the firm that was handling it, the adjuster was great. They got it to the firm day after the loss. Firm hires a private investigator, which is always a great recommendation, either an independent adjuster, somebody actually to get out there and put their eyes on that fence, because that's, in most of these states, we actually need to prove negligence and prove in some way that fence wasn't appropriately maintained or that there wasn't a fence where there should have been. What happened is that investigator goes out to the scene day after the loss, walks the whole property, finds out that we know where the cow originated by the tags, but there's no breakage in the fence. Everything looks pristine. So they then just report it back to counsel. Counsel tells the client, hey, shut it down. We have nothing here. Somehow, miraculously, the cow just got out. We have no way of showing negligence on the livestock owner. So I got the case, and one of my rules for my clients is, hey, if we have the case open, why not just send a demand and let them know, put them on notice of our claim and see where it goes, see what happens. So we sent it out. 2 days later, I get a response from the adverse adjuster saying, hey, where do we send the check? We're accepting liability and we want to issue payment. That seldomly occurs, but it does. And that was a big win. I told them where to send the check. As soon as I got the check and the release signed, I did reach out to the adverse adjuster because frankly, it's a small industry. We have a lot of work with different people. And I asked her, so tell me, this is done. Why did you agree to issue payment so quick? And the adjuster was frank with me. And she said, well, a few minutes after the accident occurred, the farmer or the livestock owner was actually driving down the highway, saw the wreckage, saw the cow right across the street from where the incident occurred. There was a huge breakage in the fence. It was negligently maintained, and the farmer had the spool of wire and everything in the back of his truck. He went out there, hour after the incident occurred, repaired it. It was good as new a few minutes later. So obviously the next day when that investigator came out there, everything looked great and he had nothing to see. But ultimately that's why this is so important too. I always tell my clients with any claims, but absolutely with these ones, you need to have good investigators. You need to move quickly. Getting to the scene 2 months after the accident, you're not going to see the same thing. We're not going to be able to have the evidence and the proofs necessary to sustain a negligence claim. So really that's one that always reminds me with these cases and frankly all others. Act quickly when it comes to subrogation. Quick, immediate investigation is a must. Mark, you got any other examples for me?
Well, dovetailing off what you just said, I teach a lot of CE classes, and I tell people, hey, the investigation is going to win the day. And, the one liner I give everyone is, if your insured is not at fault, think subrogation. So especially with these cattle claims, if your insured is driving along and they strike a cow, and assuming they're not doing anything intentionally, we need to be thinking the subro. We need to start that investigation as to how we figure that out. So, another nuanced part of this is something to look at is there are fence statutes which dictate what is and what is not a legal fence in generally all 50 states. And that's noted within the book, and we can find that on the website of what is a legal fence. So I've had claims where, the fence is improperly spaced. The fence wasn't maintained right, and it's the wrong height. And, you can make a nice argument that that's a negligence per se in terms of not complying with the fence laws. And so everyone thinks, oh, it's just cattle stuff. But there's a lot that really goes into these livestock claims simply because every state is different. Generally, the further west you get toward, leaving maybe the Mississippi River toward the Rockies, the more open range the laws are going to be. And what I mean by that is the cattle are going to be a lot more free to roam in the wider western states, in those big states. Cattle's still king in a lot of places. And so making sure that you know the laws and how these things are going to relate to these claims is clutch. And obviously, plug the book a little bit. The book does that. Our website does that. But again, investigation is going to win the day, Ashton. It's getting the folks who are looking out there to figure out what happened as quickly as possible. Because as you mentioned, 2 months later, that fence is going to be fixed. No one's ever going to know what happened. So getting photos and learning as to what happened, and again, speaking with neighbors is clutch.
Now, do we have any fence? Do we have the fence laws documented in the book or on the website, or where can listeners find the specific fence right
in the book? We've got the fences for each state that's got them. Not every state has the fence requirements, but most of them do. That's usually in the stock law, and we address those in our book as much as possible. Most states do have it. They say what is a lawful fence. I mean, they define the gauge of wire, some of them, and what kind of barbs are acceptable, and the height and the spacing between the wires, and how many wires are required, and what kind of posts you have to have. I can't say when I was in law school I ever thought I'd know that much about fence laws in all 50 states, and just never know where it's going to go. But it's very interesting, and every day makes it fun doing these losses.
Isn't it fascinating the things handling subrogation claims that we get to become experts in? It's like on product defect, a lot of product defect work. It's, who would have ever thought that I'd know and be legitimately worried about the anoid rod in my hot water heater, right? Or looking behind my toilets once a year to make sure that my water supply lines haven't deteriorated.
It's funny you mentioned that. I just changed mine out in my bathroom, the water supply line, because it was starting to show some wear.
Yeah, and I'll be going to a friend's house and I'll, be looking behind. I'll be like, hey, you're pretty close to having a leak. There's some chloride degradation on the supply line. And they're looking at me like, aren't you an attorney? It's like, yeah, just, I know things, trivia. But yeah, it's like livestock or fence house. I mean, it's really a unique thing to know quite a bit about. So, I mean, so kudos to you on that, Mark.
No, well, I appreciate that. And again, harping back on the book, Texas is the only state where it's a county by county designation. All the other states, there's state laws that deal with it. But Texas, when it was the Wild West frontier, allowed each county to make their own distinct rulings on the adoption or non-adoption of the stock.
Just to make it more unique and difficult. I mean, wonderful. Now, when it comes down to another deviation and distinction that I think is important to note, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but also not just, the difference between open range and closed, but also it's the idea that even within those states that have closed and where you need to fence your livestock in, there's different standards on proving negligence, right? That's like the idea of, what are the fence rules and those regulations you discussed? What are those elements we need to provide? What case law is on point? What precedent is there to show what's necessary to hold that livestock owner responsible? Now, that's obviously the deviations when it comes state to state. How about open range? I mean, are there any of those open range states? Have you had any luck subrogating or bringing claims against livestock owners when they have the right to roam? Aside from, obviously there's the highway claims, right? Where they're forced to still fence them in, but any comments there?
Other than, with the state and U.S. highways, those are closed range, but I haven't had any luck in terms of one that's not on a U.S. or state highway, because generally you have to show that there was some willful or gross negligence by the cattle owner to just throw them out there. And one thing I've learned is these cattle owner, this is their livelihood, right? They are not in the business of just letting these cattle go and get run over and have a vehicle collision and set themselves up for liability. They generally have a pretty good tab on their livestock because, again, it's their livelihood. And so I have not had many cases, or any cases for that matter, where it was on a private roadway in an open range. You may have a cow get out here and there, but most of the time it's going to be on that U.S. or state highway. The ranch roads, which we have a lot, and the small ranches where these occur, it's generally a cattle owner is going to be aware of his neighbor's cattle and do their best to avoid that. I think with all the fence out and fence in statutes, depending on where you are, people are very careful because that is their livelihood. So I don't have many examples where it hasn't happened on a U.S. highway, just because once the investigation gets going, generally the standard is you have to prove that there was some willful act or gross negligence. That's hard to do. Most of these ranchers are pretty careful folks.
Now, generally speaking, in the closed range states, or the states where we can actually pursue these cases and provide a showing of negligence, obviously, are there any recommendations that you have for insurance adjusters and attorneys, on pursuing these cases, or any difficulties that you take note of? I mean, what are your thoughts?
The difficulty is proving a negligent act by the rancher, and getting that investigation done. As I mentioned earlier, majority of the ones we handle are black cows at night. They're just hard to see. And so you usually got a pretty traumatic event, and, not everyone's thinking, well, hey, what's the subrogation potential on this? People were worried about injuries and getting the road cleaned up and, towing off a big truck or a car that's been, absolutely smashed to oblivion. So if you're an adjuster and you're out there listening and you get a claim like this, you want to get out there as soon as possible and canvass the area and get the photos. I mean, obviously that's the most important is proving that, and get photos of the fence and see if it's a compliant fence with the applicable state law of where you are that has the fencing regulation, and, really learn is there something that's been out there before? Talk to the local sheriffs, talk to the neighbors, figure out if this is a known problem. These are uphill battles. There's no doubt about it. But the fact that the firm and we've taken the lead on recognizing that there's subrogation potential on these claims is a testament, I think, to our kind of ingenuity and trying to learn all avenues of subrogation and how we can pursue claims that most other people would turn down.
Absolutely. So that's
take a good shot at it.
Yes. So now everyone knows, all listeners, that if you have questions regarding livestock claims, contact Mark Solomon. I will note that MWL and Mark as well. I mean, we handle these claims in all 50 states. So if there's ever a case that you have that there's a question on, that you just need to consult with someone and just ask some questions, I'm sure Mark, at no cost, would be more than happy to talk to anybody, walk you through the facts, and give you kind of thoughts as to whether or not there's a potential or viable recovery there. Right, Mark?
That's absolutely correct. And I get calls quite frequently from clients and non-clients alike who say, hey, we found your chart on the website, or we're looking up stock law and we see you've got a book, just to bounce ideas off us, and we'll tell you whether or not we think we've got a claim to pursue.
Absolutely. So now I think we touched on anything else livestock related, and then I did have another, more general question I wanted to ask, but anything else related to the book, Livestock Claims, that you wanted to touch on?
No, not really. I mean, again, it's, every state's going to vary, really depends on the geography of where a state is. I mean, the laws west of the Mississippi are usually a little different than the laws east of the Mississippi. And what I mean is that the West has a lot more open range. It's pretty closed range now, in your central eastern time zones, for lack of a better term. It's just a lot more, densely populated, smaller states, smaller tracts of land. But, just it takes a lot of investigation and applying the law to figure out, can we get a subrogation recovery from a livestock vehicle collision.
Right. So now, Mark, the last thing I wanted to ask you is, I know you do a lot of other things down in Texas. It's a huge state. There's diverse claims, a lot of things you all are dealing with. But any other big projects or interesting cases that you're currently handling?
Yeah. So our office is currently a very big player in the Texas freeze claims from about 2.5 years ago. Here's your fun fact of the day. It was, or still is, the largest natural disaster by dollars in U.S. history. The last tally I heard was about $7.4 billion in property and losses related from the freeze claims. And we are a major player in going after all of the power providers who failed to properly winterize all their facilities, despite knowing that Texas is subject to freezing temperatures from pretty much every year, and failing to adequately prevent the power plants from shutting down. So these power plants all shut down, and people lost power for week, 2 weeks at a time. We were below freezing for, I think, 5-6 days in a row in Texas, as far south as Austin and Houston. And people's pipes burst, and, just a lot of bad happened from being without power in a modern society for, week plus. And so we are leading the charge against all these power providers who, despite having the notice of previous freeze claims from years and years and years ago, and constant freezes, did nothing to prevent that. Did nothing to prevent the power source from being interrupted. And we look at states like where you're at, Ashton, in Wisconsin. Right? It's a lot colder there for a lot longer, but
sure is
lose power because everyone has adequately prepared and winterized the plants to make sure that doesn't happen. That's the gist of the main case here, and we handle a lot of that, and we've got 2 explosion cases that we're looking at figuring out and get wrapped up. One was east of Houston in an oil refinery, another one at a oil parts manufacturing facility in the middle of Northwest Houston that blew up and caused damage to thousands of homes. And unfortunately, a few deaths resulted from it, but we're involved in all those as well. So, we handle everything from cattle claims to the largest natural disaster in U.S. history, and literally everything far and in between both of those. So it's I love the practice of subrogation because whatever you see on a day-to-day basis is unique. You learn something new every day at this job, and I tell people a lot. We see things that happen, and that if I put in a movie, you wouldn't believe actually happened. We've got witness statements and reports and photos and videos of all that occurring. So it's just a very unique area of the law that you get to learn a lot and see a lot of new and interesting things
Every day is different, no doubt. I mean, the diversity of claims we see, I mean, just the stories and the stuff. I mean, it's not limited to my being deathly afraid of toilet supply lines. I mean, there's more to it, right? I mean, it's, we get to deal with a little bit of everything. So I agree. And the stuff down there in Texas, it's a great state. What you're doing is amazing. And, ultimately, I'd love to have you back on to talk about those freeze claims sometime soon. I think that's a fascinating topic, but, it's ultimately, it's been a pleasure, Mark. I mean, thank you so much for joining me today. Anything else you want to add before we wrap this thing up?
No, hope everyone found this informative. And again, if you have any questions or have any claims that pop up, find me on the website, pick up the phone call. I'd be happy to discuss the claim with you and explain to you kind of the basis of whether I think we've got a viable recovery or not. So contacts on there, and 1-800 number for our website. You can reach me directly.
Absolutely. MWL-law.com is the website. Mark is happy to take any of your calls to discuss, freeze claims, livestock and the row claims, anything you might need. But again, Mark, thank you. Thank you, everybody in the audience attending. Again, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. That's all we have for today, folks. This is Ashton Kirsch signing off with the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Thanks, everyone.